Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lingua Brutalica with me, Jess Boney-Smith, and my co-host Wes Robertson.
Hello.
In our episode today, we're chatting to Cain, Cressall and Tim Pope, who worked together to create lyrics and vocals for the Amenta, who are right here in Australia. Hey guys, how are you?
Yeah,
Very
really
well, very well. Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on and chatting to us. So to start us off, can you introduce the Amenta's music for any listeners who haven't heard it before?
I guess we're an extreme metal band. Elements of black metal and death metal, things like that. It's all very dark and horrible. We try and be a tense band more than anything else. What would you like to add, Cain? What are we?
Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Discomfort plays a pretty key role in what we do. So, easy listening is the other end of the spectrum. Yes, you could put it. So, yeah.
Is discomfort something that you kind of seek out, or is it just sort of how you've described your music after you've done the fact, or is that kind of like, is there a discomfort as an intent?
It's definitely something I enjoy. I've always enjoyed, and I think everyone in the band, in their own ways, has some kind of hunger for discomfort in different forms of art, music, literature.
So I think that's an aspect that's definitely been something that's increased significantly. It's always been there to a certain extent, but that aspect of the band has now kind of been supercharged since Cain joined. So Cain's been with us since 2009. And since then, I think the band has taken a bigger step towards that side. And that's probably a lot of that is to do with Cain's, I think, performance and on stage and creative kind of input.
I mean, so obviously fans of metal will be quite familiar with enjoying music that brings about a sense of discomfort, but I assume we have some people listen here that don't listen to much metal. So how did you go to enjoying art which provides a feeling that people generally don't think of as appealing in their music? How did you move into metal music, which is not just metal but also discomforting metal?
I think for me personally, a lot of the art that I've always liked has always been something that's kind of, that puts you a little bit off balance. I think generally, if you're a movie or a picture or something like that, if it's something that's familiar, there's not really anything there for me to grab onto. I'm not really interested in just seeing depictions of the familiar. So seeing something that kind of just makes me take a step back and unsettles me a little, gives me a chance to actually engage with something rather than just see it in a sort of really face value way. And so I think for me and what we do in our music, but also the music that I over time have got into, is the stuff that has made me kind of sit back and actually forced to engage with it and interpret it. And I think that's something that we would hope other people do with our music as well. But across everything we do, I think it's that desire to get people to interpret, to be forced to engage with the work rather than just kind of go, that's metal, that's death metal or whatever,
And also, just to touch on that discomfort thing a little bit further, the first thing that kind of comes to mind when you think of that word is, okay, so it's a metal band, discomfort. The first thing that springs to mind is just kind of overwhelming noise, distortion, awfulness. But one thing that I found fantastic about this band before I joined was a really interesting contrast between hooks that almost have a kind of beauty about them, whether that's guitar or keys driven, and more emotionally sort of charged, aggressive kind of stuff. And I think, yeah, we've definitely broadened that out in a few different directions, because discomfort's something you can feel with with like grief often has a discomfort that comes with it, but
Sure.
grief is something that can be really beautiful to explore in art and music. And there's a whole spectrum of different kind of emotional directions, I guess, that you can lean into discomfort. So it's not really a blanket kind of thing. It is a bit of a universe that has different dimensions that you can sort of poke around in. And we've probably more on Revelator than any of the previous releases by far.
And is that kind of discomforting quality something that originally drew you to metal as a broader genre, or is that something that you've kind of grown to appreciate through your work with the Amenta?
It's something that's always been there, and I think catharsis plays a huge role in it. Seeing or experiencing somebody else's discomfort through their music or film or whatever is a kind of way that, and I think this is the case for a lot of people that are drawn to these kind of extreme music styles, is that catharsis of experiencing somebody else's discomfort from their perspective, but also being able to make some kind of connection to something that touches you. And through their release, it's like you're able to release something through their magic, if you get what I'm saying.
I also think it might be something to do with the way the music sounds, especially sort of extreme black metal and death metal and things like that. When I first was exposed to it, was kind of in, tapes that friends had given me and things like that, and you'd listen to it on Walkmans. And coming from a background of listening to stuff that I thought was heavy back then, but then hearing that, it is that uncomfortable, off-putting kind of thing where you're like, I don't actually understand this, but that makes it fascinating. And I think that's kind of something that ideally we're continuing on with our own stuff.
So when you two were first getting into metal, and especially discomforting genres and styles of metal, did you pay any attention to the lyrics at all? Did you care about that? Did you look for music that also had lyrics that made you feel uncomfortable? Or what was the role of lyrics in your kind of process into being a fan of the more extreme side of metal?
Personally, and I reckon this is probably not going to be anything like your answer, Cain, but I was thinking about this today, having listened to a few episodes of the podcast, and I knew this sort of question was coming. I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, I actually don't think that I paid much attention to lyrics at all for a very long time. Because of that way I was exposed to extreme metal was, I didn't have there weren't a lot of, when I first started listening to it, it was when a lot of the black metal stuff was coming out and you couldn't really get access to legitimate copies of CDs. So someone was tape trading, or maybe someone has found a CD and then it was copied a million times and passed around the social network. So that I would get these tapes, these just, C90s with my mate's biro scroll on it. So if I could decode their writing, I'd be able to work out what the song titles were. But because of the nature of the way they sung, often had no idea what they were singing. And if I did, it was probably more along the lines of a mondegreen or something like that, where I thought they were saying something and it was saying something completely different. Mm-hmm. So for a long time for me, and probably for a lot of listeners, I think for extreme metal, a lot of the voice came down to an instrument kind of percussion based rather than any actual meaning behind lyrics. And it was more about the atmosphere for me. So that was what attracted me to it originally. But that has changed to a certain extent over time, but I still listen to metal in particular. Other music's not so much, but metal in particular, I listen to atmosphere and sound first and I'll listen to an album 4 or 5 times before I even start thinking about lyrics. But I'm sure that's completely different to you, Cain.
Huh. Yeah, absolutely. From very early on, well, for me, I didn't have music wasn't something that I could really participate in with as a kid. I didn't have instruments around me, and you know, as much as I was obsessed with music, that wasn't something I could jam with. But singing is something you can always jam with it. It's free. You don't need to buy gear to do it. So that's something I would always play around with. And the vocalists that really grabbed me by the throat, I'd be so obsessed with them, I'd have to know what they're on about. What is this guy talking about? What the nature of the delivery and the structure of the song and the hooks is just gripping me so tightly that I have to know what this is about. And one thing I noticed early on was that, you know, some of these vocalists would be really fantastic visual kind of lyricists with all sorts of metaphoric, really expressive wordplay and innovative, unique ways of expressing ideas. Whereas some of these singers were actually kind of just writing rubbish, really. Like quite uninspiring lyrics, but that kind of clicked with me that, wow, you can still grab someone just as hard with an amazing vocal line, even if the lyrics are terrible. So I think that as a kid, kind of making that recognition that some of these guys are actually kind of shit lyricists, but I still fucking adore this song. I don't care whether it's about cowboys or motorbikes or whatever the fuck it is. Like, this song is amazing. So I think that was something that planted a seed that, like, as a kid, made me think, wow, I don't need to be an amazing writer to be able to express things in an interesting way that connects with people.
Are there bands that, oh, sorry.
No, you're right. Go for it.
Are there bands that, you said you also read some bands where you really like their lyrics. Are there bands that also made you feel the opposite way, that like, you know, this is the style I need to go for if I do want to really impress people with my lyrics?
Not so much. It was more just picking up things that are exciting to me and kind of studying them. So I think the first time I remember being really intrigued by somebody's writing style lyrically was as a kid, was actually listening to old AC/DC albums, and the way that Bon Scott would write. He had this real street trash, pervert kind of nature about the way that he would write, but he wrote in a really interesting, clever way. And his writing would often be referred to as street poetry. So there's this very clever approach to arranging things in an interesting, unique way, and using a lot of metaphoric things and a lot of really interesting bits of wordplay throughout his stuff. But he never tried to sound eloquent about any of it. It was always very, you know, scumbag type of, you know, he kind of painted himself as a bit of an asshole and a bit of a pervert. Like, that character that came through his lyrics was like, oh, I would not trust my kids around this guy, kind of thing. Like,
Sure.
This guy's a perv. Is drinking piss and you know, writing songs about you know, venereal disease and pubic lice and all sorts of, you know, grotesque things that in rock in the 70s, for some bunch of pisshead Australian guys singing about you know, diseases by, like, for example, the song The Jack is all written using poker as the metaphor for, you know, for playing cards, this playing cards or having relations with a lot of people and catching diseases. And the song's chorus is basically saying I've got a disease. So like, but why would you write that? It's awful. This is not,
right.
you look like a hero in any way. It's the opposite. He's this kind of villainous anti-hero type dude. And I thought I was really grabbed by that, the fun in that kind of, there's no heroic kind of cool guy thing. It's a real, like, I'm a bit of a shithead, but I'm cool with that. And he would do it in this, he was like a poetic shithead, really.
Kind of like a Bukowski kind of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like just absolutely miserable, horrible
principle.
human being who knows how to write.
Yeah. So, and then, you've got, then on the other side, you've got guys that are using, similar kind of tricks, but they put things in a lot more of an eloquent kind of clever sounding way. So like Ronnie James Dio, for example, he'd be using a lot of wordplay and metaphoric stuff and going quite deep into a lot of really abstract ideas that have a lot of different meanings, potential meanings to them. But he put it in a much more, he'd sort of compose himself in a lot more of a mature kind of way. You respect, you read those lyrics and you kind of respect whoever this writer is, whereas Bon Scott, you think, oh, this guy's a dirtbag, but a fantastic dirtbag, like the best kind. So I guess, and then, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got people singing about motorbikes and cowboys and things, and it doesn't have to sound clever, it doesn't have to even be interesting, but if they can write a good hook, then that's all that really matters at the end of the day. But since we're talking about lyrics, back to you guys.
No, that's great. It feeds in well to my next question, which was going to be like, given that variety, can you say that there's any kind of defining quality to metal that distinguishes it from, the lyrics of any other genre?
Tim, over to you.
I don't know that you could necessarily say that any lyrics in and of themselves are either metal or not metal. I think context, you're putting something into a frame, and it's generally all about delivery, I think. Certain things, if they're delivered, I think that the key is that there's got to be some kind of logical marriage between the form and the content and the delivery. So there's the music and the lyrics kind of have to match. You can't, it doesn't necessarily work if you have a very dark, atonal, brutal, for want of a better term, song. And then if you're singing something about tiptoeing through the tulips over the top of that, then what you're doing is you're creating a discord for the listener, which potentially could work. It depends on what the aim is, but then immediately the listener is forced to engage with that in a different way. So it doesn't mean it's not going to be metal. It just means that it's maybe not going to be effective to that person. So if that person is after something that's dark and horrible, then that's going to be something they can go, I like the music, but the lyrics are weird. If there are people who enjoy that kind of, I guess, that tongue-in-cheek, ironic kind of thing, which is not my bag at all, but people do enjoy it. And for them, they would go, I like that. I think it's funny. That's what I want in metal. So I don't know if you can necessarily say things are or aren't metal. I think you can only really judge on a personal way, is this successful for me or not? So what I tend to like is that kind of, I like in all the sort of, pretty much everything I like. I tend to like it to be a little bit mysterious and interpretable. I like it not to be sort of face value stuff. I'd rather have something that you have to dig into and go, I don't really understand this, but I'm going to try and work with it and see if it makes sense to me. That's the sort of stuff I like. So I guess that's my personal preference, but I'm sure it's different for Cain. I'm sure it's different for a lot of people listening. So I personally don't think there's necessarily a metal lyric and a non-metal lyric. There's only it's only successful to the listener. The listener will say, yes, I like that. No, or no, I don't. That's my take anyway.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. The genres and subgenres tend to have their tropes, but also that point that you made before about, sometimes the contrast between subject matter and the sound of the music can actually be done in a really interesting way. There's definitely things I've come across that have had that done in a really interesting, powerful way.
Well, I was only thinking today, there's a couple of songs that I was thinking of along those lines that kind of play with that. They have, so I don't actually know the lyrical content of these songs, but I know, so one example was there's a band called Thorns from Norway who had a song called Lovely Children. And you see that and you go, okay, well, I know either those lyrics are very straight-faced and they're actually about aren't children nice, in which case that is kind of creepy, or it's being ironic, and in which case it's still kind of creepy. And the other one I was thinking of is there's an Australian band called the Bremelin, who one of their sort of big songs back in the 90s was called Humble Abode, which is obviously an innocuous title. But the one thing I remember about that album is that's one of the albums I had on CD when I was a young kid. And the CD that I had was printed without the lyrics because I knew the lyrics had been banned, I think certain governments had kicked up a stink about it, so they'd repressed it without lyrics. And so having not read those lyrics and actually not caring about lyrics all that much at that point, all I knew was the song was called Humble Abode and the lyrics had been banned. And so that those two kind of facts mixed together made me think that is obviously not as innocuous as it sounds. So metal can kind of play with that side as well.
Okay. Well, what about the flip side? I mean, we've talked about, liking lyrics that make you discomfortable. We've talked about liking lyrics that are using poker as a metaphor for STDs. We've talked about liking lyrics that are kind of a joke. Is there anything that, now that you both are, writing lyrics and have been around the scene for a while, are there things that come up in metal a lot that you find yourself kind of not interested in, or that kind of turn you off of a song?
I don't think I'd necessarily be turned off by a subject in lyrics. I mean, obviously I don't listen to, Nazi bands and all that sort of shit, but if someone's dealing with a subject, I don't think it would necessarily, there's no subject I would say, I don't want to hear someone singing about baking a cake. I don't, whatever. There's certainly things that I like more. As a writer, there's certain things I wouldn't want to do because I find it boring. So like the gore thing, not interested in doing that.
Why not?
To me, because it's a trope and it just, well, the thing for me is to me, it's got to feel honest. So I'm not singing them. So there's a whole other side there. But when I write lyrics, I've got to feel like I believe in that. Whereas writing gore lyrics is something that I don't spend a lot of my time wading through blood. So it means nothing to me and doesn't mean anything to me in a metaphorical sense or anything like that. I want to have, if I'm going to stand behind lyrics, I want to have them actually mean something to me so that ideally in a few years I can look back at it and go, okay, I remember that. I remember what that was about, as opposed to here's a pretty story I wrote about that time that I picked up a hitchhiker. It doesn't, to me, it's just, it doesn't feel real. And I'm here for it to be real. I want extreme metal to be something that is true as much as possible. I don't think it should be something that you play act, and that would be play acting for me.
Absolutely, yeah. I've never been particularly interested in going down those kind of roads either. Painting pictures for the sake of painting a picture about something that I have no connection to whatsoever. If I'm writing something, it has to have something that I give a shit about coming through that expression. Otherwise it's just kind of, like perfect, as Tim said, play acting. It's not something I've never been particularly interested in either.
I also think gore's a funny thing, because I think when early bands were doing, Cannibal Corpse, obviously, I think everyone I've heard in this podcast has talked about Cannibal Corpse.
Yeah. We say we need a
guaranteed
bell. Yeah, the Cannibal Corpse bell.
Who's got the alarm? Cannibal Corpse, when they did it, it was a unique thing. Yeah, and it was new, but the more bands that do it, it becomes like it's completely meaningless. You see,
it dilutes it. Yeah, for sure.
They're all their songs are verbing the noun, and they're all just sort of these long-winded things. Everyone's taken the Carcass medical dictionary and just they're using big words that they don't necessarily know what they mean, and it becomes not about the meaning at all. It just becomes about this is ticking. We're just filling in. We know death metal has brutal lyrics about blood and guts and gore. So let's just knock some of that shit out and we can sing over the top. So you're going almost back to the voice just as instrument, because there actually is no content in the lyrics. It's just stringing together a whole bunch of grotesque imagery, which doesn't really have any meaning behind it.
And that's not to say there's no value in it. Like
no.
There's a reason that people love this stuff. Like we're aware that there's value in it, and we've both surely enjoyed also, tons of that kind of stuff over time. But as a personal interest, kind of, it's not. Yeah, neither of us are kind of.
I'm trying to start a war.
Particularly excited.
I'm trying to start a war. Fuck all those bands.
I mean, it is interesting, right? Just how metal has existed within society, and that when Cannibal Corpse first came out, singing about murdering people was kind of like itself a meaningful act in a way, right? It was like, hey, I can do this. I'm allowed to do this. I'm going to do this. And now everyone's like, yeah, you are.
Yeah,
it's fine.
I like to think that those early really extreme bands that actually there was a mainstream understanding of it. What they're basically doing is they're going out to the perimeter of the death metal compound and they're sticking the no trespassing signs up around the border. And that means that anyone who's not really au fait with extreme metal will go, oh, I know death metal is all that really gross lyrics and I don't want to know about that, which really just gives us the rest of us kind of the space to do what we want to do and kind of do the art side without having to not worry. But, it lets us keep this thing that's kind of precious and special to us without it being diluted.
Interesting. So like the Halloween costume that scares everyone away, and then the decorations outside the house.
Yeah.
Inside the house, everything's fine.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
That's a terrible metaphor. I'm sorry.
You got to try these things.
Yeah.
See what floats.
Don't know it's bad until I say it.
Yeah. That's half the struggle of writing an album, just getting through all the shit that doesn't work to the point and refining it down to the stuff that does. Yeah.
Well, as you say that, can you give us like a summary of what your approach to writing lyrics is? I know, each of you have kind of contributed different amounts of lyrics to, songs of different albums and stuff, but if you can kind of give us in a nutshell what your process is, that'd be wonderful.
Start off, Tim. Get in there, mate.
All right.
Get in there.
My process has changed, I think, a lot. The first album would definitely be just Juvenilia. That was, we needed some lyrics. I'll bang some stuff out. And that's outside of maybe 3 songs in that first album. I don't really, I try not to think about those lyrics all that much. The second album was getting a bit more aware of what I was trying to do. And that was, but still, that's a different to what I'm currently doing. I think when we started writing Flesh is Air, which was the first thing I'd written with Cain in mind. So previously we'd had Cain as our third vocalist over 3 albums, the first 3 albums. The first 2 I'd written without really thinking about the vocalist at all. Just, we need some lyrics, let's get it. The second album was written without a vocalist. The vocalist joined during the recording of the album. So I'd had no real sort of thought about who was singing, how they sang, all that sort of stuff. With the third album, it was the first time I started thinking about, okay, well, we don't have, Cain's voice is very different to everything we'd had before. He's not like our first singer, Mark, was a very sort of guttural, aggressive, almost hardcore shout sort of death metal thing. And so writing for him would be different than writing for Jared, our second vocalist, who was a bit more sort of high up and a little bit more frenetic and things like that. Whereas Cain has this much more emotional way of delivering words. I think there's a quality to Cain's voice which none of the other vocalists have, and very few vocalists have, which is even when he's singing more aggressive styles, there's almost like a plaintive kind of like a cat yowl in his voice, which is really unique. And so
thanks,
you're welcome.
Cat yowl, nice.
That is a compliment. I mean that very complimentarily.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that, but I also, most of my exposure to Cain at that point was he'd sung for us for a couple of years, but live, and you'd recorded one new song, which was the Void song. Everything else he'd recorded up to that point, it was re-recordings of old stuff. So I still didn't really know what Cain could do. So I was writing lyrics then, and at that point I'd also had some kids, so I'd written some really aggressive lyrics before. Coming into writing that album, I don't really feel like that anymore. I'm quite happy. So it took a while to find something that felt true without being wrong. So that was a different journey. But then writing for those lyrics, we learnt quite quickly that the way I write and the way Cain sings don't necessarily match up. So when I would write for a song, I'd go, this riff goes for 8 times. In my head, that means this many lines, and I'd write that many lines, and I'd give it to Cain. But obviously, I'm not a singer in any way, shape, or form. So in my head, I would sing at a completely different speed than Cain would, because Cain is actually a musician who's singing correctly. And so the lyrics would have to end up getting chopped up and changed around. And so part of the process was I'd write these lyrics and they'd go through the Cain filter, and Cain would kind of pretty much edit them while he sang and go, okay, well, this part actually works really well here because this is kind of a climactic line, and this is where I end up when I sing that line. So lyrics kind of became a little bit more modular. So taking that into kind of how my process for the new album Revelator, I wanted to create something that was completely modular, so that rather than being meaning contained in like a stanza of 16 lines or something like that, I wanted to create something where you could take little chunks of meaning, little nuggets of meaning, and you could juxtapose them in different ways to create other meanings, similar to the way you would do a collage. So my process for Revelator, which is our last album, was completely different. Rather than sit down and say, I'm going to write lyrics, I carried around this little black book, which I carry around everywhere. And I just for about 3 years, I would write down just even single words or one line or something just as they popped into my head. And the idea was that I was playing a game of, I guess, Exquisite Corpse. I don't know if you know that's the surrealist game where one person starts out writing and they fold it over, the next person writes, and then you fold it out and you've got something. So I wanted to play a game of Exquisite Corpse with myself, with the other party. Instead of being another person, it was just time. So I could write something which meant something to me at the time. And then I'd write a whole bunch of stuff completely unconnected. Later on, I'd come back to that just book of just weird little phrases, with forgetting what those actually meant. So there's kind of these hidden nuggets of something in there. But I'd then take those little things and start arranging them into a form that had some kind of internal logic. So a lot of it was just juxtaposition of ideas and sounds and things like that, with the idea being that there's some kind of meaning contained in those original phrases, which will still spark something for me. Occasionally I'll go, fuck yeah, that's what I meant. But then there's also this macro meaning, which comes out from the juxtaposition of them, which I've found allows me to interpret my own lyrics in the way that I hope other people do. So I can read those lyrics and they mean something to me today, but I can read it again in a month and they'll mean something completely different. So certain phrases, just because of the nature of the way it worked, the way I wrote, I can see certain obsessions of mine start popping out. Because I didn't actually sit down and go, I'm going to write about this, I would just write phrases. And it just happens that over 3 years, certain things kept popping up and certain ideas kept happening. And so you can kind of pull those into a set of lyrics, but they've got all these weird jagged edges, and it's not a nice, easy thing to pass. Mm-hmm. It's quite a strange thing. Obviously, there's also a lot of puns and plays on words and things throughout that set of lyrics or that album, which is also another way of just trying to make the words unusual to me, so that when I see them, it's something that's unfamiliar. I think that makes it more exciting for me personally. And then it goes through the Cain filter again. Cain gets to interpret that fucking garbage that I wrote and reads it back to me. And then the way Cain delivers it gives it a completely different emotional resonance than it does have on the page. So for me, it's like a completely new thing again. And I've thought for this album, one of the things I wanted to really explore is the idea that there's more than one set of lyrics. There is the lyrics as they're written. So if you read a lyric, they show something. Words have different meanings when you actually see them written. The shape of words and the way words are actually spelt can have a different meaning to the way they sound. So there's the way they sound and the way they're delivered, but there's also the way they're heard. So I wanted to play with the idea with death metal, obviously, and with as I've mentioned, the way I was really sort of listening to death metal a lot as a kid is you don't necessarily know what the vocalist is saying if you don't have the lyric sheet. So you kind of create your own meanings out of it. And I wanted to try and deliberately trigger mishearings, so that people would hear a certain phrase and think it was saying something else. And the idea being that they would be these other meanings in there that they would think, okay, I think that's what it is. And then they'd actually look at the lyrics and go, oh, that's not what it was. That's fucking weird. So there's deliberate attempts to try and trick people into hearing weird things. And then Cain's delivery is part of that as well. And we had a lot of discussion. I remember we had one thing where the word was refuse, which was a play on refuge. But I wanted it to sound like refuse, as in trash. And just because when you sing that, you just can't really hear it. And I remember Cain and I go, oh, you got to say refuse. He's like, I am. And I kept hearing it as refuse. So there's all this sort of stuff in there, all this stuff. I don't know how effective it is, but that's what I wanted to do.
You just like struck a question off our list, man.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Damn it,
Yeah,
Tim.
we have a question on refuse. On the refuse thing, that's literally on our question list. I'm kind of upset.
Oh, wow.
We can still go through it if you want.
All right, yeah. No, well, so like when you're all this stuff, like is this Cain, is this news to you, or is this something, Tim, that you talked to him about as you passed the lyrics off, like it before they entered the quote unquote Cain filter?
I don't know if we never really sat down and said, this is what we're trying to do. I think I told you about the process as I was doing it. I remember showing you the book and going, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, but I think that was actually a fair way down the track.
Yeah.
At the beginning, I think it started with maybe one or two lyric sheets of just, yeah. So it's a lyric sheet, fairly weighty. There's a lot in there. Not too sure how it's all going to fit into the song, but I try not to get too hung up on that because it just kind of makes the process a little less flowy. So I like to try and go with my gut as far as rhythms and melodies and tones and pitches and things. And then, yeah, I've got a sheet of lyrics that I've not seen before. We haven't discussed it. I'm just kind of looking at that sheet as kind of a toolbox of puzzle pieces to fit this thing I'm slowly starting to construct in my head, as far as the vocal delivery goes, and trying to keep it intact where I can, but sometimes that it doesn't work out, and so I've got to sort of massacre the lyric sheet a little bit, and then yeah, me and Tim will discuss it because I don't want to destroy. I don't want to totally ruin any chance of meaning in a section of a song or really upset the flow if there's supposed to be a flow of ideas in some kind of sequence. But there wasn't too much. There wasn't really a lot of that. More often than not, when I'd chop things up, I'd send it to Tim, I'd edit the lyrics and say, look, this is how I've reordered them. I don't know if that still makes sense. I mean, the lyric sheet didn't make a whole lot of sense to me anyway. So I don't know, you'll know whether I'm butchering this or not. So I send it back to him and he'll kind of go, yeah, that bit actually works really well. This bit's a bit funny. Leave it with me and I'll work the lyrics in that line to fit the patterns that you've got there, but still carry the flow that I was looking for. And he'll send the lyrics back to me and I'll go, oh, cool. Yep, I'll retrack it. The patterns are the same, the delivery is the same, but there's just maybe a couple of words that have been shuffled around or whatever. So it was kind of a putting the puzzle together as we go sort of thing. But yeah, for the most part, I was just kind of looking at a page full of puzzle pieces that I was just trying to arrange to fit my vocal patterns. So, and thankfully, it kind of seems to have worked out pretty well. So, go team.
Go team.
So based on that, it sounds like you don't really talk about like the concepts or ideas behind individual songs before it actually comes to the editing process. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we did for Flesh is Air more.
Yeah, because we went into that album thinking, all right, because at that point, Tim was a lot more time poor. So he was kind of, open to like, maybe we can play around with working together on this, but we've got to be on the same page. We can't be writing totally different things. So Tim had started
I remember
that album had a core beginning
Yeah.
point, and we did discuss that, so that we both are working towards the same goal rather than going in different directions.
I remember having a phone call with you, and I said, for the lyrics, nothing's allowed to rhyme. Don't rhyme anything. I remember that.
which has never been something I've been particularly excited about anyway. If there is rhyming, it's always very sparing.
Yeah.
Constant rhyming is there's bands doing it well still, and there always will be artists doing it well, and finding new ways of expressing themselves and keeping that kind of tradition. But it's not exciting for me. It's clearly not.
You
exciting
just come for another question.
Yeah. So there's one rhyme. A day man, I cover my eyes, blinded by sunset and rise is a rhyme that we found. And Cain, on a song you wrote, down on your knees, plead for disease, worship the noose, gagging for abuse. We found those. We wanted to raise them actually because they were some of the few rhymes we found throughout your lyrics. So we're going to ask you like, hey, why no rhyming? And then you scooped us again. So we did find them. You were unsuccessful in completely removing them. So there's a few.
I believe that rhyming has its place.
Mm-hmm.
The way I always thought about it is like, I remember in high school learning about Shakespeare, and the way the only people would rhyme would be important people. So the sort of general people coming in, the servants and things never rhymed, but the king would rhyme, and the end of scenes would rhyme. And so I took that to be, all right, important bits can rhyme because that makes them stand out a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always thought, especially with death metal and black metal, it's so bizarre to me that we make this really discordant, angular music, and we sing like the Cookie Monster having a stroke. And then lyrics rhyme like a nursery rhyme. So why have we got this dissonance, and then we're trying to put this consonance over the top? And I think the way I listen to rhyme is it's rhythmic. So you've got this, if you rhyme at the end of a phrase, you've got this ba 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 ba, which I find really asinine. But I think what I think is really interesting is internal rhyme, because that changes the way the line is sung. Mm-hmm. So I'd rather do internal rhyme and alliteration and assonance and things like that, because you can play with the rhythm of the line without ending with that really kind of pat, just here's the end of a phrase, you've reached it, kids. I don't think it works with the music. I would much rather, I think what Cain and I have done successfully is, Cain's amazing at interpreting the rhythms that I'm trying to create. So they're not necessarily what I think they're going to be, but I'll write a phrase and go, this is how it works in my head. This is the way it flows. And this is the way, as you sing it, it's tripping your mouth up this way. For example, on the, not that this is a song that Cain actually sings, but there's an instrumental on Revelator called Wanderlost, which even now I can't even say it. It breaks my brain because it's obviously it's based on Wanderlust. Wanderlust, thank you. But it's the vowels are all transposed, and it's the weird part is it's not even a vowel transpose, it's also a sound swap. So the vowel sound swap front to back, but there's a vowel transpose. So that sort of thing I find really interesting. It changes the way not only you sing it, but the way you see it and the way you hear it. And then Cain can then take that and actually make something useful out of it and sing it properly and sing it, which once again he brings in that emotional content. So even though he doesn't necessarily know my meanings, to me it feels like he's interpreting it in a way that means something else. So I don't know, Cain, if when you're singing it actually means anything to you while you sing, but to me it comes across when you sing it, it sounds like it has a meaning, and it sounds like it's not a meaning that I wrote, and that's important to me. I want it to be strange to me.
Actually, before you answer that, that's another question we actually had. So let's make it official here, because we want to ask you, Cain, specifically. Is there any difficulty in singing lyrics you haven't written, and is there any process that you need to do to make them feel personal, to make them feel like your own, or to find meaning in them? How do you take them from words into something that you can sing with like passion and energy, and sing in a way that isn't just like karaoke, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, this is a really interesting discussion, and it's actually kind of funny that we've never had this discussion. I'm just realizing as Tim's explaining that, oh wow, we've actually never discussed that. So it's a mystery to Tim where I'm at when I'm doing this. And the truth is, that the emotional charge, regardless of what kind of emotional charge it is, whatever is coming through in the delivery is always based as a kind of response to what's happening in the music. So I'm not really, I'm working with the music, trying to complement what that music means to me. So as I'm listening, I listen to what that's triggering in me, whether that's a despair or a grief or an aggression, whatever it is. I listen for that and I respond to that. So I'm delivering with the music, and the lyrics just happen to be these tools that I'm using for those colors, if that makes sense. So it's really quite, basically it's random what those lyrics are going to be, because that vocal delivery, that the expression that I'm bringing is going to be that way regardless of what words I'm using, which sounds like, in one way it kind of sounds terrible, like, oh, you mean you've got no connection to the lyrics? Oh, that's terrible. How can you sing something that you don't even have connection to? Well, because I have connection to the music, and I find Tim's writing interesting and exciting to play with. So, and the thing is that what these things mean to Tim don't need to mean the same things to me. And I think that's what's worked out as this kind of happy accident, is that by following my gut and going for the expression that makes most sense to the music, it gives the lyrics new meaning. Just, that's not planned. I'm not trying to give the lyrics a specific meaning, but they acquire it, they inherit new meaning. So it kind of just works out somehow.
Is that true for the lyrics that you've written for this band as well? Because you do have 2 songs on the last album. You were written by you. Was that also just to fit the music, or did those, when you sing those, do you feel more like you're saying something that you've thought up and put meaning to in that kind of way?
I would, yeah, absolutely. I definitely, the approach is the same. I'm putting the emotional connection between my expression and the music first. That comes first. If I happen to write a lyric sheet of stuff without the music in mind, because I don't think I didn't write the lyrics specifically to a structure. I similarly to Tim, I put together basically a big shit pile of words and sentences that were all kind of just splattered across a page, and then I take that as a toolbox to the studio and figure out how I'm going to arrange these words and lines to fit the expressions that I've got in my head. So if even in the instance of potentially demoing the vocals with my lyric sheet in front of me, and I might be reading along in some chronological order of how I've written it, but if I happen to get to a line which has a really aggressive kind of volatile nature about it, I'm not going to necessarily change the expression to suit that line. It's always going to be juggle the lines around to fit the expression. But yeah, I guess that is one that both sides of the coin have their pros and cons. So working with Tim's lyrics, they're really abstract. The connections that Tim has to them, I don't know what those meanings are. So there's almost like a freedom in making, in participating in this collage. He's started a collage, he handballs it to me, and then I mess it up even more, and then he just checks it to make sure there's nothing too ridiculous about it, and if it's working, it's working. whereas writing the lyrics myself, yeah, I'm thinking about the meanings, and it kind of does become a little bit more of a process. I love the freedom in working with Tim. There's there's a freedom in doing that. But yeah, on the flip side, I have no connections to those words. They don't mean anything to me. They're that chopped up that there's, if I'm trying to analyze a song, there's a 1,000 ways you can interpret each section. So rather than labor over trying to find out what Tim's perspective is on it, both of us agree it doesn't really matter, because it's really about creating something that is potent in the end product and doesn't come across as being totally ridiculous. So
Sure.
Actually,
yeah.
while you were talking, Cain, I just realized, I remembered that there was one of the inspirations for the style of the lyrics for Revelator actually came from a line that Cain wrote on Flesh's Air. There's I believe it's in Sewer. There's a line, and Cain, I don't want you to tell me what it means. It's really important that I don't know.
Awesome.
But there's
Deal. You got a deal.
There's a line in there which always stuck out to me, and it's the line is "Dogs where it sleeps," and for me that was just such a bizarre term and such a bizarre line, and I loved it because you're using dogs as a verb. What the fuck does that mean? But to me, that had this feel like Australian prison slang. You talk about someone being a fucking dog. It had that kind of feral weirdness to it. And it was like, what the hell does that mean? And I love the fact that there's this line that is so fascinating to me, and I don't know what it means, but I keep coming back to it and keep thinking, what is this thing? What is it? And I wanted to do that with Revelator for other people, but also for myself. That's the kind of feel I wanted to have when I read back to my lyrics is, I know there's something there and I know there is a meaning, but it's elusive. And that kind of allows you to keep creating meaning. You keep creating meaning every time you come to it and reinterpreting it. So that,
Sure.
sorry, just to jump in, that was just something that just occurred to me.
Oh, that's really cool. And that actually reminds me of the first time I ever recognized that same thing that you're talking about, that noticing of that experience, and thinking that's interesting, the way that affected me, hearing that line, reading that line, but being uncertain about what it means, but knowing there's something very maybe sinister and very deliberate and purposeful about it, even though I don't know what that purpose is. I remember one of the first times I noticed that in another band, and it made me realize that that's something that's really exciting to me, was actually Al Jorgensen from Ministry.
Right.
Their earlier ones, that my copies at least didn't have lyrics, and it just added to the mystery of, and having your ear pressed to the speaker going, what is this guy on about?
Yeah.
Whatever it is absolutely creepy. It's something not quite right about this guy. But the lyrics that you could pick out, the lines that you could pick out, would often be quite abstract, but have some kind of really grimy, sinister nature about it. And that was the first time I noticed that. I don't know what that means, but those words make me kind of feel a bit unsafe. And I just loved that. And that's something I've always loved about a lot of the films that I'm interested in, art that I'm interested in seeing. So naturally, I wanted to find a way to capture those kind of expressions that trigger other people in that kind of way. So that's something I really love about writing lyrics, is finding interesting, expressive ways of putting words together that trigger some kind of discomfort in people, without necessarily knowing what it means. Because anyone can say something offensive and make you feel and you feel offended or upset by it. But to say something that they don't even understand, but somehow it makes their stomach turn, that's cool. I want to do that.
Yeah, those old Ministry albums for some reason like hold up in a really, like, the technology is all quite old, right? But they still have this weird, like, uncomfortable, like, just atmosphere and kind of grime to it that it's, I mean, I'm always impressed going back to those albums, kind of how much that holds up over time. He was doing something really weird with like the delivery and the sound that I think is
just a really purposeful rule breaker. Real just caution to the wind. Expression is everything. Make noise, commit, and just keep doing it. That's kind of the feeling that I've always kind of got from that band.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not to say it always works. There's been releases which I've kind of gone, ooh, it was a bit of a misfire, but I'll still be around for the next one. So keep on doing it. Keep up the good work.
Well, it's interesting that you say, you're talking about rule breaking in the case of ministry, because obviously that's something that, as we've mentioned, is something that you both engage in your lyric writing. As something that's, Tim's already mentioned, there's some unusual language, we could say, appearing in some of your lyrics. And in some cases, you've even seemingly like made up words or kind of altered words in quite interesting ways to engage in that kind of wordplay that you were talking about earlier. I was wondering, how do you decide when's the appropriate time to kind of mess with, the rules of language? I suppose, at what point do you decide to, diverge from the rules and, make up a new word?
Yeah, I guess it for me, it all comes down to, initially it comes down to rhythm and things like that. So when I first started writing lyrics, one thing I was really interested in was the cut-ups that William Burroughs did.
Yeah.
Particularly, so I think when I first started writing the first album, I'd read a few. I think I'd read Naked Lunch and I'd read Soft Machine and things like that. And Soft Machine in particular has a lot of cut-ups. And I loved the way the sentences just became alien. It's like you're reading, instead of reading something a human wrote, it's something a centipede wrote. It's the most uncomfortable alien thing. And I loved the way it interrupted the syntactical flow of a sentence. So you all of a sudden you've got something that should mean something, and the words are there, and you recognize them, and there's obviously meaning, but it's clouded. And I loved that it just made things just seem a little bit unusual and unfamiliar, I guess, and uncomfortable. So that was the initial thing. And coming into Revelator, I've always played this game just in my head. Just when you see a word, you just kind of try and transpose letters, and you play around with it and see if you can get other words. And just, part of, I guess, our band's whole sort of social interaction is trying to make each other laugh. So there's a lot of stupid puns and all that sort of stuff going around as well. So my brain probably works that way anyway. But I like when doing that, when you can change a word up and you can do something to it, and it seems like it's got another meaning now. You kind of break open a word and you can see all its gooey insides, and the guts spell out something new. To me, that's really cool. That's exciting. And if you can put that into the collage that we were talking about, so you've got, once again, the meaning of the word as it sounds. So Cain will sing most of these words pretty straight, but they're spelt on the lyric page in a way that's kind of fucked up. Hoping that people will hear a meaning and then come to the lyrics and see a different meaning. So you're ideally getting more bites of the cherry. So if in playing with those words, there is something that it has to seem true. It can't just be, this word looks like that word, so that's enough. To me, it has to work on a I don't know if thematic is the word, but there needs to be an internal logic. So there needs to be a relation between the two word shapes or meanings that works in some way where they complement each other, or they juxtapose in a way that's more than the sum of its parts.
Sorry. Okay, well,
that's all I'm looking for. So when there's so many, this book is full of just these stupid, so many of them, and there's a lot of them that they're just not right. You can see it's like, no, that's trying too hard. That's not a word. That's not a meaning that really matters. Mm-hmm. But there are other ones where it's like you're kind of seeing, this is going to sound incredibly pompous and wanky, but in the same way that people like, the Cubists, they were interested in looking at art in a way where instead of seeing things from 3 dimensions we currently are, you're changing the perspective. So you're getting multiple perspectives of the same thing. Mm-hmm. I like to think of that being with a word, like you're seeing a word from both the front and the back. So you get to see not only, the the actual word as it's presented, but you get to see all the weird stuff behind it. And a lot of that is, I'm aware, speaking English, what a ridiculous language it is. It's cobbled together from German and French and all sorts of other garbage. So words have all these historical other meanings. And the other thing I'm obsessed with is the sort of the text. Roland Barthes is, I've only read a little bit, but I know one of the things he talks about is the text of things, where there's the word as it is on the page, but there's also the word as it means throughout the reader's entire reading experience. So every time we see a word, each time we use it and each time we hear it used, it gets these kind of incrustations of meanings, like little barnacles on them that it carries through. So every time you use a word, every time you use that, it means something completely different. It's changing each time you use it. The example I always use is when we think of the word, I'm going to use a terrible word because it's just such an easy one. But if you were a dog breeder and you go into polite society and you start talking about a bitch, you're talking about a female dog, but there's no way you can use that in that context without being aware of how that's going to be received by other people. So that word has so many meanings outside of the context, outside of all of a sudden you're taking in the listener's perspective on that word. And that's what I wanted to do with the words I'm using. I want to use them in a way that there is a meaning that Cain's singing and people hear, but there's also, they come to it and they have to be forced to engage with the word. So they now go, okay, that's not what I thought it was. What is it? Okay. What is that word? It's like, lifting up the kitchen dishes and you think you know what's going on and all of a sudden cockroaches come flying out. You want that moment where you just go, what the fuck is this shit?
So this is actually, it's good that we're moving into some kind of deep discussion of your actual lyrics, because that was kind of the next section. But I'm going to jump ahead to almost one of the questions we're going to ask at the end, because we did want to talk about this. My research interest actually is on writing changes to language which only exist in written modes. So when they're spoken out loud, they're lost. So I really wanted to talk about exactly what you're talking about, because you're the first band we've talked to that did stuff like that. Because you have on the song, like I'm going to mispronounce this, but Stasis.
Yeah.
The first line you have the word unable, but the able part is spelled like Abel. And then the word sun appears, but it's spelled TSUN. And of course, when Cain is singing this, you can't hear that, right? You have to kind of look into the lyrics. And there's even times where you just like write apostrophe N as in prayin and shamblin. And I listened to the lyrics and I think Cain's sometimes mispronouncing a G sound. It is screamed, so it's tricky, but all this came together to make me feel like there's a desire I read it as a desire that you have for the audience to read the lyrics, which was interesting because metal is thought to be music, right? A music, an auditory art form, and demanding or hoping, perhaps, I'm not sure, somewhere in between the two, that if the audience wants to get the full picture, they actually do have to come back and read the lyrics, not just because they're screamed, but because the spelling of the lyrics themselves are part of the art form, was something I kind of hadn't seen. Is this kind of line of thinking right? Like, is for you getting the reader to listen to the song, come access the lyrics, and then try to understand the spellings within the lyrics part of like what you consider the whole package to be, and something you hope that they do?
Definitely. I think it's not so much demand as you mentioned. It's like hope. I like that it's there, because I think it's unfair to say, I don't think you can say once you release art, this is the way it must be consumed. So I don't think you can say, if you're going to listen to my band, you have to read the lyrics. This is where it is. If you don't do that, you're not getting the full thing. Everyone's going to interpret it their own way. But I think for me, it's important. I want to have, in the same way I want the art that I consume to have as much depth as possible. I love digging into shit. I get obsessed with bands and writers and things like that, and I want to know about it, and I want to dig into it, and I want to get it. And I want there to be that level for someone. So there is, you can just listen to the music and you will get stuff out of it. And if you can hear the lyrics as they're sung, there are meanings there. I just want there to be layers, because I think it's important to understand language does exist in different modes. There is spoken language, there's written language, and there's listened to language, there's heard language. Those are three different things. And I love the idea of playing with that. I find that really exciting. I think words are, they're little chunks, they're little signifiers that you can play with. You can have a great time with. You can really change someone's perception just with something really, really small. So I definitely hope that people are going to look at that. There's certain aspects of the lyrics that only work on the page.
Right.
It's not the only meaning there, but that's definitely written so that there is something. If you read them, you'll get something there. And I love. I tend to read more than I listen to music. You know, that's probably what I do most in my leisure time, and I love that aspect of language. So you look at something like, I mean, the most obvious example is something like James Joyce, where he's playing around with words constantly, or someone like Vladimir Nabokov does a similar sort of thing. There's a kind of such a love of language that you get to play with it, and you can create an alternate meaning or an alternate reading, I think, more importantly, for the text. And I think that stuff's really exciting to me.
So like when you spell sun, TSUN, is the goal there like to create that sense of just comfort that we kind of started this interview with, or is there a specific meaning that you intended behind that spelling? Is there something that like it means to you to have that specific word spelled in that specific way?
Well, I mean, I don't want to go into meanings of lyrics too much, because
Okay.
I think mainly because I don't want to lock things in for myself in concrete. I found in the past, when I've spoken about the meanings of lyrics, if I talk about them, that becomes what they are. The story I tell becomes the thing I remember. And I want to keep these things a little bit odd to me. I want to forget things and remember things and do all that sort of stuff. And that's really important to me. However, for that one, just to give a little bit away, I think from memory, soon there, TSUN, is part of the line soon on me, which if you that's one of the things where I wanted it to sound a certain way and to look a certain way and to kind of suggest something. Soon on me, to me, sounds like tsunami, which is referring to, there's a reference to waves and things in that song. And I mean, I don't want to go into what that necessarily means, but that was what that was. I want that to start suggesting to someone, hey, there's a meaning here that you can look at. And there you've got a meaning that's happening on the page, so you can see that's spelt differently, but then that directs you to the sound, ideally. I mean, right. I'm certain that most of this is not going to be found. And to me, that doesn't bother me. Just the fact that it's there and it could be is exciting. I mean, if people find one thing and go, fuck, I didn't notice that, that's cool. You know, that's great. You don't have to get them all. Mm-hmm. It's not Pokemon.
Have you had any feedback like that from like fans and listeners that have, you know, picked up on some of these layers of meaning, or perhaps have interpreted things that you haven't even intended to have embedded in the lyrics?
There's definitely some. One of the funniest things I've found is that outside of this conversation, pretty much all of the in-depth conversations and also critical kind of write-ups on lyrics have been from non-English speaking countries, which really? I find really interesting. And I think that's potentially because someone from Poland, for example, who's going to interview a band from Australia will go, all right, I need to know what I'm talking about. This is a language that's unfamiliar to me. They're going to actually engage with the text in a very different way to someone who can just gloss over it and just go, yep, got it. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that the lyrics are trying to do, is trying to get people to slow down a bit and go, just have a look at this word and look what it looks like. Look at how, look at the other things it's pointing at. And I think people who don't speak English are kind of, just because it's not the first language, are forced to kind of engage with the text in a different way. So that's been the case generally. But there have been people who've said, oh, this is funny, he's talking about this, which is not something I considered. But the key point for all of this is there's no reason why that isn't also true. My meaning, the way I've written it, is that there isn't a meaning, or there isn't one meaning. There's meanings to me, but they also change. And I wanted it to be interpretable. So other people's meanings mean just as much, in the same way that if you were to go and look at blue poles in the art gallery, you can say Jackson Pollock's trying to do this, but someone would go in there and go, I think that looks like this. There's no reason why that meaning is any less valid than what Jackson Pollock set out to do. Art exists in a kind of interaction between the viewer and the artwork, not between the artist and the art.
And to put so much work into a collage like that, it would kind of be a shame to give a particular idea or construct that sort of represents, because then it takes, you know, if you put that out there, then it takes the fun out of it. Like if you were to give it away and say, this is what this means to me, then yeah, it's kind of a bit of a waste, because when you don't put it out there, it's that is just a lyric sheet full of Easter eggs, and it's up to you to find them and figure out what they mean to you. It's really there's a lot of bonuses in there that way. It's cool.
I think it's like, imagine if David Lynch came out and said, what this movie actually is about is, you know, this, you go, great, thanks. That's
yep.
Brilliant. It strips all the magic and mystery away from
Sure.
the work. You want to kind of let it happen.
So does this desire for, like, you know, creating these layers of meaning motivate your choice to use, so, you know, quite archaic or uncommon vocabulary often drawn from other languages? You know, for instance, you know, there's track titles from some of your earlier work, you know, songs like Enea, you know, come 9 in Greek, Second vitality from the sun, it's Egyptian, there's Gaelt, Old Irish for he who goes mad from terror, if I'm not mistaken. And then, you know, if your more recent work, there's things like palimpsest, tabula rasa, ego ergo sum, you know, some of these are Latinate. So yeah, is this all part of that, like building up these layers of meaning that aren't necessarily accessible at a very surface level?
Yeah, I think probably. I mean, to be perfectly honest, some of that early stuff was we wanted lyrics, and it was like, I don't want to call this song, you know, stabbing a puppy to death. I want to have something that has a mystery, I guess. And
sure.
A lot of that was written under the influence of you know, growing up listening to black metal, where you didn't necessarily, might have been singing in Norwegian or something like that, or so the idea of having words that weren't necessarily easily passable was, I think, it allowed us a little bit of room to move around. As we went on, I mean, palimpsest is something that I'm obsessed with those. I think that's, for me, that's the, like, it encapsulates what we're talking about here. That's where you've got
word.
Yeah, it's such a great word.
Yeah.
It's such a good word in so many ways, because it looks cool, it sounds fucking great, and it means something important. I mean, it's basically a key to everything we're trying to do. It's amazing. So, I mean, anyone who's interested, go look it up and try and work it out. But I just think it's fucking beautiful.
I fully had to look it up. I'm not ashamed.
I think I've encountered it through like some metal band using it. So yeah, it's a cool word. It's a really cool. I've never seen one in real life. Well, actually, I guess probably at like a museum. Yeah.
There's so many that you wouldn't even been aware of. I mean, you always read in the newspapers about they've done an X-ray of a painting, and they're like, hang on, it's painted over another painting. Mm-hmm. You know, this absolutely hidden work underneath is fucking fascinating. This is incredible. So fuck, I got sidetracked. Sorry. I love that stuff. Ego ergo sum is obviously a play on cogito ergo sum, and that was more just because ego looks like ergo. I like the. I'm sure that's terrible Latin. I'm sure it's not Latin. I think you said it was Latinate. That's probably about right. But I like the way the words look together. That's an important aspect to me, is the way words look, the way they nudge up against each other, the way they sound, and what they actually mean. All those three things have to go hand in hand, I think.
So we don't want to like focus too much, obviously, on stuff that's too far back in the past, especially when you guys weren't working together. But just really quick, why is it that the second album, Non, has like none of this? You've all the album song titles are things like really straightforward words: junkie, vermin, slave. Do you remember just even briefly kind of why that album is so straightforward in the way that the songs are presented?
I remember writing those lyrics, and there was a deliberate attempt to be as unpoetical as possible. I wanted that to be just like a punch in the face. I wanted that to be just really, really nasty. And part of, I've always liked single word song titles. I think when you're talking about words, the more words you use, the less meaning you have. I think when you give, say, a word like junkie, if you say that word, people start kind of, they make a pool of association with that. If you start saying the junkie from Parramatta, then that pool becomes a lot smaller. The more words you use, the smaller it gets. So I love the idea of just using a word because it allows the most amount of interpretation. With non in particular, one thing that I was really interested in doing was playing with people's perceptions, knowing that we were a kind of an extreme metal band. And at that stage, one of the more extreme bands. I liked the idea of taking a word that people would think they knew what it meant. And then the lyrics not being about that. And some of them, in retrospect, I don't think was done all that well. I think it was a little bit clumsy. But if you look at something like, for example, the song "Whore," obviously that is a pretty loaded word. In retrospect, I think this was maybe a little bit too far. But I wanted to use that word for people to go, okay, I know what that is because this is heavy metal and we know what that means in heavy metal.
Sure.
And then the lyrics aren't about that at all. The lyrics in that song are more about about selling yourself out, not kind of doing what you should be doing and instead kind of going for the easy way. It wasn't supposed to be about, it wasn't sexual in any way except in its reference. So that kind of thing, I wanted to play with that sort of thing. And I don't think it was 100% successful. I think I learned some stuff from that and went, okay, I'm not really into being as bald as that. I'd rather bring it back a bit and be a little bit more esoteric. It felt right at the time. We were very angry, very drunk young boys. But I think, from there, I think we've started to get something that's a bit better. That didn't necessarily have the uncomfortable thing that we do with Cain. That was like a really aggressive thing. That was, that it didn't have that level. The album, I still love the album, obviously, and there's certain songs on there I'm really happy with lyrically. But overall, I think that album doesn't have what we have now, which I think is much better.
So another change that we kind of noticed over time is your use of swearing, because your first album, Ocasis, is very clean. It just has one instance of damn. In contrast, Non has 12 uses of fuck or fucking, one of shit, no damn, and of course the song whore. Flesh's Air, then, where you first started working together, has 6 uses of fuck, 8 uses of shit, 7 of which are from Cain, which we'll get to in a second. 1 use of bitch and cunt, and then no uses of damn again. And then the newest album is completely clean. So I guess our first question here is, when you are using swearing, what is your goal in doing so? And like when you do bring these words in, what do you feel that they add to your art in those cases?
Well, just because I haven't spoken enough yet. I am actually surprised that Flesh's Air has that many, to be honest. I would have said there was like maybe 1 or 2. I know there was a couple in Cain songs, but I'm
a couple.
Quite a few in Cain's, yeah.
Cain's fucking filthy. I in Non, I remember that was because I was trying to make it as unpoetic as possible, and I obviously I swear a lot, and I swear a lot, Dave. I swear at work. This is a normal part of my life, and it's like the way I use it in sort of day-to-day speech is as a kind of, I guess, to give things a little bit of heft, a more emotional heft, like that's fucking ridiculous as opposed to that's ridiculous. So in writing in Non, I wanted that to be as real world as possible. So I tried to bring in the way I would actually speak into it a little. So I think in that, generally the words tend to be, I can't remember the term for it, but basically just to up that kind of intensity of a line, as opposed to being like, Max Cavalera in Sepultura would use it like Tom Warrior would use an ooh, like at the end of a phrase, he'd just go, fuck. And that's obviously fucking weird. So I didn't want to do that, but it was in there with shit. I think shit is a fucking great word. I think there's a difference between shit as an expletive and as a description for feces. The word shit is another word that if you say to someone, I've stepped in feces, they'll laugh. That's fucking funny. If you say I've stepped in shit, they can smell it. They know exactly what you're talking about. There is a filth associated to that word. So to use the word shit in lyrics to actually mean shit as opposed to I feel shit, then I think you're bringing in something that has associations which are really, really strong. Right. I haven't used it on Revelator because it doesn't Actually, no, I didn't deliberately not use any. They just didn't happen. I think because of the way the words were kind of the wordplay and things like that. That's not as funny to me as taking another word and messing around with it. So those words are too strong almost. I mean, you can't do anything to shit. They're also shit and fuck are really short, sharp words. There's not a lot you can play with in them. You can't break them open and find other words inside. So they're not that exciting in that way. But I'm a big fan. Just to go back again, because I want to say it again, I'm a big fan of shit. Shit is great.
Well, on the topic of the word shit, let's go to Cain here, because you wrote 2 songs on Flesh's Air, Disintegrate and Sewer. And these contrast just like the albums do in the fact that Sewer contains 7 of the 8 uses of shit on that album, and the use of bitch and the use of cunt. And Disintegrate, though, on the other hand, is completely clean. Now, obviously, we understand why a song called Sewer might have the word shit in it frequently, but that's not like mine's not blown there. But can you give us an insight into why these 2 songs that you wrote have such a huge gap in terms of the level of vulgarity across them?
It's really just where those songs are coming from lyrically, coming from quite different places. So Disintegrate was more it was kind of almost a self-help song. I doubt anyone else would probably catch any of that because of the way that it's constructed. But for myself, it was I haven't read those lyrics for a while, so I can't really remember a whole lot of it, but it was coming from a bit more of a spiritual kind of place, I guess, whereas Sewer was more of, and they're both very coming from a very personal, very specific place, and I don't like hanging out my dirty washing, so I don't write things in a way that spells out a story, but it is coming from a very specific place. And Sewer, it's actually hilarious to hear a study of this particular swear words and how many there were. I've never considered any of that, so that was quite impressive to hear that spouted so easily like that. Is very cool. But yeah, Sewer was a very personally seething song. I was absolutely seething writing the lyrics, and it's all just coming from the heart. It's not, I want to sound offensive, so I'm going to let's collect a whole bunch of swear words and use them as often as I can. It was very genuine, coming from a very traumatized and angry place. So, and it's a cathartic way of releasing those kind of traumas through writing and performing this stuff. Mm-hmm. So it was actually a really helpful thing for me writing that song, because in the digging deep and uncovering all that filth, there's going to this awful place and really just getting my hands dirty and digging through it, and just kind of splattering it at the wall and reassembling it was a really therapeutic thing. And I think a lot of it's, it's quite a common thing with extreme music, particularly getting those it's kind of shadow work, really. It's getting those things out there, and my feelings towards that particular place that those lyrics were coming from back then doesn't have any of that. It doesn't carry any of that energy anymore. I actually got out what I needed to get out, and I can read those lyrics now and I'm completely disconnected from them, but I remember that person. I remember who I was then and how affected I was by these particular circumstances, but I haven't held on to it. Mm-hmm. I released that energy through writing that stuff, but it was very genuine and purposeful. I'm never one to use swearing for the sake of being offensive. It was just very genuine, and yeah, it was coming from the heart. So, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't surprised how many of those words and how commonly they were used throughout that song.
Quite shocking to
Oh,
hear.
really? That's terrible. Why would you do that? But yeah.
Well, given that you've talked about your kind of personal attachment to the songs, this relates to another question that we wanted to ask, which is, regarding the topic of perspective. Because, we did notice another kind of interesting contrast that comes across the different albums is the choice of pronominal forms and perspectives in individual songs and, across different albums. We've noticed that most of your songs of both the early and more recent albums feature the pronominal forms I and you. There's quite a lot of first person perspective. And I wondered how this relates to the kind of difference in perspectives that yourself, Cain, and Tim were talking about earlier, when it comes to both the writing of the lyrics and performing those lyrics, as the vocalist. Like, how do you view yourself in relation to the I in the songs?
Well, from a writing perspective, the truth of the matter is, the reason I use I and you is because they're much more immediate. They're obviously first and second person, really straight up. If you start talking in the third person, then it starts becoming narrative driven, and that's you're stepped out now. You're not one of the parties, which is not as strong, I think, in an emotional sense. But the honest thing is that generally in songs, when there's a you, it actually means I. Like it's most of the songs that are saying you, I'm actually writing about myself. It's usually, this is something that I've worked out over time. When I first did it, it definitely wasn't conscious, but I realized what I was doing was picking out aspects of things that pissed me off about other people, which is really something that I could see in myself and I was fighting against. So a lot of that really nasty shit on Non was really a bit of like trying to, like Cain says, it's almost like self-help, but that was kind of misdirected. And I think one of the reasons I use you is to try and get a bit of distance from it. So you can kind of externalize something and go, that's what I'm talking about, as opposed to, I think if you start using I too much, not only obviously you're identifying immediately, but for a listener, things start to become a little bit solipsistic. People start looking at it and going, this guy is kind of just singing about himself. I mean, I think about, I was never a big fan of nu metal, but I found when I listened to stuff, a lot of the songs there had this kind of woe is me kind of feel about them.
Sure,
and
yeah.
to me, that is fine in doses, certainly. But when that's all it is, it starts to become really distasteful. I find that really kind of off-putting and just like, this is not something I should be involved with. It's not that it's wrong. It's just, this is getting too much like listening to someone's therapy tapes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you can play with that perspective, then you can kind of leaven that a little bit, and you can get a little bit of distance there. But I also think there's times when I works really well, because it's essentially which direction are you pointing the finger. And I always think about it in terms of Cain singing, or now it's Cain singing, and thinking about how he would perform something. Because when you're talking about you, I imagine him leering and pointing and screaming at people. But there's the other side that Cain has, where he turns kind of inward. And I like to kind of play off those two things. For me, that's kind of one thing that I'm interested in playing with.
I've definitely always been very self-conscious of I's and U's because of that, like what you're talking about, that overuse does become kind of something that you just want to steer away from, just because it's so overused, and partly because it does limit the perspective of the listener to some degree, for sure, but just when it has purpose and it is limited to purposeful, it can be a really powerful thing. But some people tend to rest on it because they're not too sure what else to do. It's easier to write songs that are my experience, me, you, me, you, you, me, you, you, and it does without with that overuse, it loses its meaning. So yeah.
So when you sing do you kind of adopt a particular persona that's consistent with that perspective, or do you see yourself more in the you, like Tim was saying earlier?
In performing, I would have to say, I've not really considered that question, but as I'm thinking about it, I would have to say I do attach myself to the I when I'm performing. I do take that on board as part of who is projecting this narrative, this story, this idea. I definitely take it on board, and in the same way, it's an outward kind of
well, you definitely
an outward directed thing for sure.
With for example, like there's a song on Non called Vermin, and the chorus is the delightful "You are vermin," and that's always something that I have this picture every time I think about that. I can see you, Cain, live. That's somewhere where you always have that audience interaction. You're always pointing at some poor little person, some poor little dude who's come to his first gig, screaming in his face. So there is definitely something you do with the you, where you are projecting out. It's I don't know if it's conscious, because I think you obviously you're in the moment, so it's not something you're considering.
Yeah, it's not conscious at all. Yeah, I'm having to actually think about it to go, oh, actually, yeah. I guess I do that. Yeah, it's I guess I try to be, whether I have any really linear kind of understanding of what the lyrics are in the case of Tim's lyrics. If a particular lyric sheet is completely abstract and I have no connection to the overall idea of that particular song, I'm always connected to the music and the delivery, and so any pieces of the puzzle along the way that that I may sort of attach some kind of connection to, I want to exploit them when they're there, use them when they're there. And yeah, it's not conscious. It's not a conscious thing. It's just I'm just kind of I'm sort of doing a self-assessment as we speak. But yeah, I definitely grab onto the things that do have any shred of meaning, and I make as much use of them as I can. In the case of areas where there might not be a direct connection to subject matter, the lyrics, I just rest on the music, and it's about just that same as in the studio. And when I'm putting these pieces together, I'm relying on just knowing that the energy that I'm bringing to a delivery, I just want it to somehow marry with the song, with the riff, with the change, with the whatever. So I'm really, I guess it's a back and forth thing between either just leaning into the energy, leaning into the expression to work with the song, and at times it will be a lyrical thing, but it's all over the place, to be honest.
What about the word we? Because when Jess was looking at this, she noticed that on Non especially, there's a higher instances of we, and we, like, both of us kind of interpret that album as having some references to kind of social cultural issues like mass media dependence, etc. Is when you use a we, is there a shift in focus? Like, do you imagine you're talking to the whole world, to your audience? What goes on with when kind of we instead of I or you?
I think the way I see the pronouns is I being personal, you being a little accusatory, and we being inclusive. So that's the kind of flavors, I guess, that I write playing with. So when I use we, generally, it's kind of a bit more like a gather around, let's have a bit of a kumbaya moment and pay attention to this. Whereas the you is you need to pay attention to this because you fucked up something. And the I is, hey, check me out, I'm a fucking miserable cunt. But I think the we generally, I can't really remember any instances of Non, so I might be making this up. But I think generally that would be trying to be a little bit more inclusive. But you're 100% right about Non's overall kind of meanings. It was all based around, that was starting to be written in sort of the post 9/11. When I became, I think it was probably around before then, but when I became really aware of the 24-hour media cycle and that sort of, that we were just getting bombarded with information, that was the kind of thing that that kind of came into that. So I guess one of the things there is that there is this perception of us versus them. So that was a big part of the narrative that is being basically shoved down our throats. And a lot of that is about how you are changed by the media you consume. So anything that anything you're exposed to is going to change your perception. And with something like the 24-hour media cycle, especially in that era where it was particularly aggressive stuff and it was really us and them, the perceptions of people is going to change significantly. So the way people see groups is going to be, they're going to be much more enclosed. So we is an interesting term in that sense because it can refer to, it's inclusive, but it can also be quite restrictive. So if you're talking about we as in this group, what you're actually saying is no one else. And once again, I can't remember where it's used. So if you have an example, I'd love to hear one.
We can boot one up.
Yeah, I'd be really curious.
We are dirt is the only thing that popped into my head. That's the only
yeah,
thing.
I guess that was one where it was more. That's another one where I'm actually talking about myself, but dragging everyone else around with me, which is pretty fun. But that one was meant to refer to everyone. There was no sort of exclusion there. But there's no reason why we can't be exclusive in some ways.
So on Vermin, all in the gutter, we search for flaws. Then we have, let's see here.
So that's definitely exclusive. The we there I'm referring to is us in the band.
In horror, we are all in the gutter, but some of us look for stars. Oh, that's quite similar.
Oh, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of playing with the same phrase and trying to change it up.
Sorry.
One thing I like in lyrics is I see it like sampling. So taking something, sometimes from other sources as well, but sometimes from our own stuff and putting it in a new context, because I think it keeps some of the emotional resonance from the earlier use, but then you can put it in new context and you get something that's richer now from being used somewhere else. So someone might go, oh, that's that same thing from that other song, but it's used in a different way so that it unseats people a little.
Spine seems to be the big culprit here because we have only buckled car bodies in which we are caged, which is repeated. We will all be hunched shoulders, windows shut and air recycled. We are in neutral, careening down steep steps. Every time we crash, everything's starting towards zero. Yeah, that's the, and then dirt has on everything we've gathered. We are water dripping from leaking rusting taps. We are flickering embers. We are the dirt. We are just dregs. We are water dripping from rusted taps. We are dirt. This is all we paint. And then repeats of those. Yeah. So those two seem to be very, very we heavy.
Yeah. Well, that it's those two in particular are quite social in their outlook, I guess. They're talking about us as humans, you know. So the we there is kind of everyone. But it's interesting the other one was referring to the band in particular. So they're all in the gutter, we're searching for stars is actually a play on an Oscar Wilde line. But that was more, you know, basically we're all in the same situation, but some people are actually looking for something, looking to try and get out of it. So I guess the we is quite powerful in that way. You can use it to bring people in, but also to exclude people. I don't know. It's quite an interesting one. I haven't thought about that before, but that's very interesting.
And Cain, do you use it in the same way when you're performing those songs? Like, do you feel like it's like inclusive, or is it also, I don't know, accountable in some way?
Have you accidentally used the band we as a never one?
Yeah.
No, Spine is definitely had a huge us and them feel to it for me, and that was actually the song that really drew me in to being curious about the band, was seeing them play that song live. Particularly the guitar work really drew me in. I liked the atmosphere that's created in that song, and yeah, then actually learning those lyrics to play it live, it really yeah, that us versus them thing really resonated with me a lot. So that's one of my favorite tracks from the earlier Amenta stuff. And yeah, I do have that I do definitely carry that purpose and that conviction with that song. With Dirt as the other example, that's probably, I've always thought of Dirt as being more of a little bit more of a limited to us as a group, but also it's up to the listener to decide whether they are part of that group or not. Because yeah, the more you sort of flesh out those lyrics, the more you sort of work out whether you fall into that category or not. And there's some people that will read that and go, yeah, I'm definitely not a piece of shit like you guys. I've got a bit more class. I'll disclude myself from that we. Yeah.
All right. So we have the inclusive we, the exclusive we, and the we that you choose to exclude yourself from, I suppose.
I'm trying to think whether I've even written with that in mind before. I can't think of an example of really writing that way. But yeah, anyway.
All right. Well, so this was the point in the interview where we're going to ask about rhyme, but that opportunity was taken away from us. So we did have one other thing though that we noticed that is rare in your writing. These are I think these are all from Tim, but when it happens like you go kind of all out, and that's the use of ellipses. So it's not something that you, like, most of your songs don't have it, but on Ego Ergo Sum, you have the lines, a pissing contest for pointless piss ants, the selfish scrawl of another septic soul, and senseless stock sounds seeps from paint smeared smiles, a rattle of the real in a dusty derelict theater, which is just, ellipsis, starting sound, just repeated over and over and over again. I guess, why did you use it here? Simple question. Like what was the effect that you're going for this specific amount of ellipsis in this specific context?
I like, so it all comes down to rhythm again for me. So to me, when you do that to a line, you're forcing someone to engage with the line in a way they wouldn't normally when they speak.
Mm-hmm.
So it forces you to be a little bit more aware of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. There's certain effects. So I really like S sounds, obviously tend to come across a bit more like a sneer. So when people are hitting S sounds a lot, they tend to sneer the line a little bit more. P's are obviously plosive, and there's a little bit more aggression behind them. So you can kind of, in one of those lines you mentioned, it's all S's and then it goes into P's and things like that. So you've got this like switch up where you've got the voice kind of changing from a sneer into something that's a little bit more punchy. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's rhythm, and it's when I write a line, in like looking at just as a unit of a line being the unit that I look at. I like it when there's something in that grab me. I don't like rhyme because it's pat, but there's so many other ways you can play with a similar sort of effect. So, I mean, obviously internal rhyme is one. You can have assonance, you can have alliteration, all that sort of stuff. Is ways to play with the rhythm of the line and do that similar sort of thing to rhyme without there being that consonance, which I don't think makes sense in the context that we're using it. Mm-hmm. So it's just finding interesting rhythms for lines and interesting. The sound of words is really important to me. Not only the way they look, but the way they sound. So what the vowels are doing, also what your mouth does when you say them. So I came across this line the other day, which is not one of mine, but I thought it's so fucking clever. It's a line from not a metal band at all. It's a band called Purple Mountains. And the line is, we stand the standard distance, strangers stand apart. And there's a lot that I love about that line. One is obviously there's repeated kind of sound. So stand the standard and distance, strangers. But the way it's forcing you into this kind of rhythm, and the vowel sounds are quite short, but then you get at the end where you get a part, you've got quite this long, like the AR vowel sound is longer than the others. So all of a sudden, as soon as you get this part where you're talking about being a part, you've got this like longer sound. So I really like that sort of thing. So there's this level where the way words sound can actually impact the meaning, or you can get more out of them. So the music of the actual sentence, the music of the line, can be a pleasure in itself before you even get to meaning.
Absolutely. And part of that is I would say, dynamics and contrast. Is like what you're talking about, is contrast is a big player in that. Having a big clutter of something, and then turning the tables and being faced with something so separate from what you've just been sort of assaulted with, that you almost don't know what to do with it. You feel kind of naked all of a sudden. And actually that was something that I really enjoyed about that specific reference to the intro lyrics of Ego Ergo Sum, was that kind of cluttered bunch of sounds that often are things that people try and avoid as singers, trying to soften certain sounds or avoid using certain sounds too much. Whereas Tim had bashed out this kind of awful clutter of these sounds, and rather than me try and dilute that by softening certain things, and I had more fun just wringing its neck and going, yeah, let's do that, and really ride that out. And then and then Eric's left with the hard task of figuring out a way to mix that in a way that isn't totally awful, but still carries that kind of clutter and discomfort in a way that works. So.
So when Tim works that stuff in, it's fun. It's like there's a fun aspect for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I'll keep doing it.
Yeah.
Just for you.
Next album's just all
Thanks, Tim.
one
Yeah.
one consonant starts every single.
Yeah, just F's, P's,
Careful what
and
you work
S's
with,
and
yeah.
T's. That's it. Yeah.
It's almost, I think a lot of it comes down to because death metal and black metal vocals are amelodic, and they tend to be, if they're going to be an instrument, they're a percussion instrument as opposed to a melodic instrument, more often than not. So those are the ways that you can kind of change the percussive strike in the same way that you would, if you hit a different drum, you get a different sound. So it's a way of, if you had every word in the lyrics start with the same letter, it's going to sound pretty similar. It'd be like hearing when people terribly trigger drums, and you can just hear the start of the trigger happening every time you get that, which drives everyone insane. It's the same with words. But if you can play with that, and you can have parts where you've got this real attack of a certain sound and then it softens off and things like that, then you're getting something that I think is potentially rhythmically interesting. It obviously requires a vocalist who delivers it well, and thankfully Cain does. But I think it's a fun thing to play with.
And I suppose what you're talking about there seems to be kind of relevant to another question I wanted to ask, which is about how the lyrics of both your most recent albums have a very kind of poetic and surreal feel that certainly enhanced by that kind of assonance you were talking about earlier, but also through a lot of abstract imagery. So for instance, on Flesh, Tim has lines like the snakes escape, a vicious primal joy, trading reason for reflex, and vagaries for void, leave your weapons at the doors of imperceptions, tail and teeth. And Cain wrote on Disintegrate what seems to be images seen by a feral monkey hung up in a sack, which include a severed head, a grain of sand, a flickering ember, a faltering fire, a brick in a wall built upon a foundation of nothing. And the new album too has lines like square dwellers begging for change, an arid spring, cold unmarked grave, birds flown to entropical climes, sore eye, cysts, sick eyes sore. So did you guys coordinate this kind of style in your last album? Is this kind of like abstract imagery that you wanted to kind of run through all the songs of that album?
I don't think we ever had a conversation about that. Do you remember, Cain? I don't think.
Well, because I didn't write anything on Revelator. That was I was just kind of excited to open these toolboxes of puzzle pieces and do what I felt was exciting for me with Flesh is Air, I think we're both just excited by words that create that kind of trigger the imagination. I think that's just something that that's been an exciting thing for me, and I'm guessing it's probably the same for Tim. It's when you're reading material that conjures really very strong imagery, that's something that we both really enjoy. So I guess it's not like we're going out of our way to try and do it. It's just they're things that we're excited by. So naturally we kind of play with those kind of things. So, I mean, discussing stuff for Flesh is Air, it was more an overall theme. Like it was an umbrella that we've got to be under the same umbrella. If there's going to be more than one writer, we don't want it to be, one person writing abstract kind of philosophical stuff and the other one writing about football or whatever. It's just gonna probably not carry that well. So there was a thematic umbrella that we both did discuss. Like Tim had the concept sort of bubbling away a fair while before we'd even started really playing around with demoing a whole lot. So we had a bit of a discussion about that umbrella. And that was very easy for me to kind of go, cool, yep, I can work with that. This will be exciting. And Tim was kind of like, I've already got some things happening in this area, in this area, in this area. Maybe you might want to play around in that area. And so I kind of just went, that would be something I could definitely connect with. I've already got something coming to mind that would fit that territory. So that's about as in depth as it got, really.
I don't think we had any. I think you're right. It's just, I think one of the reasons why Cain and I are such good friends is we have a very similar interest in the same sort of things, the same sort of art. So when we do catch up, which unfortunately is rare at the moment because we live on the other side of the country to each other and there's this pandemic going on, but we spend most of the time watching movies and drinking some wine and watching ridiculous movies. And a lot of that is that kind of really surreal imagery and things that I guess have that really vivid and colorful kind of look. So I think that's something that we're both obviously attracted to. We like the kind of the creepy oddness. So there definitely wasn't something we discussed, but something we're both attracted to and both kind of came to through just working along parallel lines, I think.
So that segues actually to the next question, which because it's another similarity that we noticed that I'm going to just be a little arrogant here, and I hope this surprises you because I don't like if it doesn't, whatever. But I hope you're a little bit surprised by this. But you both have a lot of animal references as imagery and metaphor. So on the album that you both contributed to, it mentions a dirt-smeared beast, a worm feeding on mud, a snake, a well-groomed mongrel with a gut full of worms, a pig, tigers of wrath, birds, and the aforementioned feral monkey. And then the new album has a bit less, but we still have a poor cur and curs on different songs, serpents, a tapeworm tangled around the stolen seed, mounts, and parasites. What is the goal of these animal references? And is this something that you've noted that you do? And do you know why you kind of keep coming back to pictures and images and metaphors of beasts?
That's a fantastic question. Yes. I'm impressed. I've never considered that. I've definitely never considered that. I've never had a conscious consideration about, I need more animals. I keep going back to the same ones. I'm putting a rhinoceros into this song. Fuck this.
Sign for the new album.
I know why I do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that one of the things that I think one of the obsessions that Revelator kind of showed up, and I've realized is pretty much a through line through everything that I've written, is that kind of so humans obviously are monkeys. We're overgrown monkeys with somehow we've had this consciousness thrust upon us. So we're this weird line between a beast and a god, and we can't really fit into either camp. So it's we've got this amazing consciousness, which is only really a burden, at least to me. So you've got these sort of animal instincts. There's an animal part, and there's a conscious part, and there's on top of that, there's also a socially conditioned part. And these are all kind of at war. I think the reason why we have social restrictions is because people left to their own devices are a little bit shit. They tend to be, they tend to be a little bit selfish, and I think there are systems put in place to stop people behaving that way. And that's the social conditioning, which obviously isn't something that just happens straight away. There's a whole historical framework around that. But there's also, when we're humans with a consciousness and we're born into a world that we didn't ask to be born into, there's all these questions of like, how is this it? How is this what we're doing? And the biggest thing is, why do we have to have a fucking body? This is so undignified. Why are we born here and we sweat and we leak and things break and things grow that shouldn't, and things don't grow that shouldn't? It's so absolutely undignified is the best word for it. And so I'm really interested in that particular Venn diagram of pain, where the beast and the god and the socially conditioned man or human are kind of fighting that little war to try and get it to work. And a lot of Flesh's Air is about that directly, and it's about that war between what we called at the time was the realist, which is someone who's very much engaged with the world, and the obliterate is someone who doesn't want to be engaged with the world at all and just wants to be a kind of beast of instinct. And at the time, well, no, still, I mean, I'm not sure which is correct. I love oblivion as much as the next person. I love to drink. I love to forget, but it's not actually a way you can live your life. And so a lot of that is, I guess, examining that side. For me, the beast is representing an aspect of us and potentially a freedom, because there's freedom in obviously not having to be engaged and not having to be aware. That's, I don't think it's as simple as this, but everyone always has these sort of visions about just stripping yourself of responsibility and stripping yourself of the pain of consciousness and just going, right, I'm just going to be this kind of animal that just does what I want. If I'm hungry, I'm eating. If I need to sleep, I'm sleeping, all that sort of stuff. There's no sort of, I don't have to get up in the morning and go to work and all that sort of stuff. So that's what it is for me. I know that's why it keeps popping up for me. That's something that I'm very much always thinking about in some way, shape, or form.
Man, if you're talking about discomfort, that little, I'm not sure what to call it, the doublet you had there of things grow that shouldn't and things don't grow that should is up there in one of the most, I don't know why, but that's one of the most disgusting phrases I think I've heard in my entire life. As someone that likes horror movies and metal, I don't know why, but that's gonna haunt my
unsettling
brain. Yeah, I don't like that phrasing. I really wish you hadn't said that in that way, at least.
Next t-shirt.
Yeah.
Tim's body horror special. And it's interesting hearing that, because that's kind of reinforced something that I've noted in the past that is just as important to the working relationship as the things that are parallel with things that are exciting or our perspectives. So as much as we share certain perspectives, there are others that we don't. And like Tim talking about, we didn't ask to come into this body and that kind of stuff. My standpoint is very opposing, which is I have some kind of knowing that I did come here deliberately, and things like that. But rather than these kind of opposing perspectives being a destructive force that breaks up a working relationship, it's just as much the things that do work as the things that don't work that create something unique. So yeah, that was just interesting hearing that and kind of remembering that, oh yes, we don't agree on everything, and that's actually the a beauty of that working relationship is it would be boring if we did have the same perspective on everything. We would run out of things. So
well, I think that's quite a nice note to kind of wrap up on. So I suppose given that, like, what would you say is the kind of role of language and lyrics in the Amenta's music overall, if we can kind of bring our discussions together in some nice wrapped up conclusion?
I'll have to leave it with him. He's written far more lyrics for this band than I have, so
well, or
I
just
don't
like
have the authority.
But like not even just in the band, just in metal in general and in music, because you do write lyrics for this band and you have written lyrics for other bands. Like, please don't feel like you shouldn't say that.
Don't
like,
limit yourself, yeah.
Like in metal, in this art form that we all enjoy
In metal,
and that
in
you
general,
make.
yeah.
I mean, maybe Tim more specifically for the band, but yeah, in this art form that we're all at least fans of, consumers of, for you two producers of. What is the role of language in your mind?
It's both. It can be incredibly significant and it can also be very insignificant. So there are some bands that I listen to and I don't give a shit what they're singing about because none of it resonates with me, and it doesn't need to for me to care about the song. So for me, lyrics are a bonus. So good, powerful songwriting comes first. If the lyrics of the band are something that's also filled with stories and different perspectives and lessons and questions, that's just a massive bonus. I personally don't go looking for that in music, but when it's there, it's just, it adds to the dimension of the overall project. So
I'd agree with that.
Kind of my standpoint.
I'd agree with that, but I reckon it's important to add that I think we should be treating language the way we treat music. So in extreme music, we are constantly pushing what we do to our instruments. So people are inventing new extended techniques to play on guitar. Drummers are changing techniques to get faster and do all this crazy shit. We should be doing the same thing to language. I think the fact language shouldn't be a static thing. It shouldn't be just something that we just glom on. If we're going to be extreme, and if we're going to be experimental and we're going to push the boundaries of things, let's do it across the board. I think that's the stuff that I like. I like the language that's like, this is interesting. I mean, we're definitely not the only band doing it. There are definitely others out there that do it. And it's not common, but I love when people are pushing that boundary because as Cain says, it's not necessary for me to enjoy the music. I come for music first and come for atmosphere and feel and things like that. That's more important to me. But when they have that extra thing, and if you can push all those boundaries out, then that's very exciting to me.
It's interesting you bring that up because like we haven't had many people mention that specific, but I think like in our Archspire interview, they mentioned kind of the same thing, and that they were like, yeah, we're putting all our other instruments to the fast as we can go. So my vocal delivery needed to be that as well. So it's definitely something we've seen a few times, this idea that the lyrics, the way that words are being used, not just the delivery, but like the way that language is being used is also supposed to be pushed up to a higher level. Is it only twice we've heard, Jess, or do you know another artist that maybe mentioned this?
I think it's something come up directly, like maybe once or twice, but I think indirectly though, people have kind of touched on the idea that they feel that their lyrics need to kind of meet the level of like artistry that the rest of the music has, set the standard for.
Yeah. And you used to be able to do that through just being more gory, but like that doesn't seem to be something that anyone, I guess we've hit that limit, I suppose.
It's like with music, you used to be able to do it by tuning down and playing fast.
Yeah, true.
You can't do that anymore.
Yeah, drop your guitar down to D and all of a sudden you're breaking new ground, right?
That's right.
Well, thanks. This has been fascinating. I really appreciate really appreciate both of your times. And it was really cool to hear you kind of riffing off each other. So your latest album came out pretty recently. Is there anything in the works people should look out for, like videos or releases, or is it kind of the next thing? Is there a tour coming up?
We probably not touring anytime soon. We did have a tour booked last year when we got to do one show of it, and then all got canned.
Oh God.
So we're going to play it cool for a bit, but we're focusing now on new stuff. So rather than play, we're pretty much either if we're touring, we're probably not writing. So we're focusing on writing. We do have something we're just knocking off the last bit of at the moment, which is not a new album, but it's a new thing, which hopefully should be out relatively soon. But then we're going to get into a new album. So I know people who know us are well aware that we've generally had a long time between albums. So we're trying.
Yeah, for sure.
Down.
Nice. That's that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where's the best place for listeners to keep up with your most recent work?
Best place for us is Bandcamp. I mean, listen wherever, but obviously Bandcamp, it's much, much better for us if you're purchasing from us direct. We actually might get some money out of this fucking
Great, we'll link that in the description.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Cheers.
Wonderful.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for being on. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Lingua Italica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.